Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'm very glad to be here at the Clear Mountain Monastery project. I've known Ajahn Kovilo for as long as he's known me, and just a very good friend. And Ajahn Nisabo also visited Abhayagiri in his early years as a monk, so I've known both of them for quite a while, and I must say I'm somewhat impressed by their willingness to go start a monastery. I have no such ambition. So So far this morning, we chanted the Mangala Sutta. That's the Buddha's discourse on the highest blessings, and then we sat in meditation for 20 minutes. And what should we say? At least myself, I've heard that I'm not going to try to guess how many 100 times I've chanted the Mangala Sutta, but this time, as I was, for whatever reason, you heard the words again and just recognized how powerful they are, and then with meditation to settle the mind. So much to talk about, but also so much just to stay still. Because, this is not... Ultimately, words will never satisfy us. And so that much to be said for wordless silence as well. But, this being a Dhamma talk, I have to say something. So, so I guess the themes about just how to maybe I'll say a bit more about further steps in meditation. I'm used to doing a hour-long guided meditation at Chithurst, which I'd never used that form before, and they, as a monk of 10 Vasa, they really like it if I take my turn to give the hour-long guided meditation, and I've discovered that I love it. My mind is much better my mind meditates much better when I'm telling other people how to meditate than it does when I'm sitting by myself. But 20 minutes is a bit short. So, but I can say a little bit about where maybe I'll say a little bit about where I would go from there if I had more time in that guided meditation, and then we'll see if it can transition into sort of how do you use that, how do you apply that stillness to ordinary life. See how we do about that. So working with those qualities of attention to the whole body, being with that energetic, the awareness of the energetic experience of breathing, and then expanding that to the whole body. One simple thing is just working with using that to work with the hindrances of either restlessness or sloth and torpor. Because if you're restless, it can be very helpful to pay more attention to the out breath, because that's what soothes and settles the mind and body. And so if you put more attention there, that will have a greater effect. Whereas if you're tired, well, if you want to go to sleep, do that. But if you're trying to meditate, do the reverse. Pay attention to breathing, put more attention on breathing in. And that will naturally energize the body and mind, which is what you want. So that's a helpful way just to use the natural qualities of the breath to help stabilize the experience of body and mind. And what often arises when you've stayed present with that breathing for a while is some form of well-being. It can have a physical component, some pleasant sensations in the body associated with the breath, or it can be purely a more mentally oriented happiness. But in a way, it's just the mind. Finally, we lug the world around on our shoulders most of the time, and when we finally set it down, the mind just breathes a sigh of relief. That's for right now. You're not thinking about all the problems that you have, or all the problems you think you have. And just being with the simple experience of breathing in and out. And so it can be helpful to, when that sort of joy or well-being comes up, it can be helpful to consciously allow that to pervade the body. Because what can happen is that you get excited about it. Wow, I have, I'm getting really happy right now, or there's this, fascinating energetic sensation. And you think, wow, my meditation is going really well. And you think about, well, is this going to happen next week? Or whatever happens there. And so you start proliferating, and then, 10 minutes later you realize, hey, wait, where'd that go? So what I would suggest is and this comes from the Buddha. I mean, I quoting the Buddha's own advice here, is to drench, steep, fill, and pervade the body with that experience of well-being. Because I think many people are aware that the body holds trauma. That if you have a traumatic experience, it can get lodged in the body and cause problems. But this is an experience you want to lodge in the body, because if you want to use your body to remember how this experience of happiness, joy, well-being, gladness feels like. Because if you put it there, then even when you're not meditating, it'll be around to some extent, and you can bring it back. So really, letting it soak into the body. This is really good. And So, and it's possible, and I don't have a whole lot of experience here, but it's possible that this may help with healing trauma. It's also possible that if you do this, some trauma will come up, and you might need to get, again, that's a whole nother topic. But it's at least good to recognize that it could happen, and not to be frightened of it. But you might, again, might be good to get some advice from a senior teacher if it's causing challenges. And so, letting that well-being soak into the body. And if you want to learn more about this, Ajahn Kovilo is an expert. He's written a book. He's probably already told you about it. But you can ask him, read his book and ask him questions. And then there's another component of the breath that is that in some way I think is even subtler than the experience of the energetic experience that we were working with, and that is there's the breath, and then what? I mean, just knowing the breath is, in some ways we gloss right over it, but there is any mindfulness of any knowing of breath. Well, there's the breath, and there's this quality of knowing. You can't have one without the other. But the knowing is pretty slippery, so we don't start there. Start with the body, and but it's also and so one of the ways to. But you can use it in a number of skillful ways. One, I spent much of the retreat that I was on during the winter, just investigating. I would experience the breath and get accustomed to this quality of knowing of the breath, and the knowing. One way to sort of observe it is that the knowing state, the energetic of the experience of the body with the breath fluctuates with the in and out breath. The knowing stays put. It doesn't change. Knowing in breath, knowing out breath. I mean, the object of knowing is different. The quality of knowing remains the same. So if you look at what stays the same when you're breathing in and out, what aspect of the breath stays? And when that's established, this whole time one's working with stray thoughts. I mean, the mind is not the mind. It's rare that at least my mind doesn't have some other thing that it wants to think about, and I keep reminding it. Right now we're breathing, but then. When you've got what you can do is you can start to use those very distractions as a source of wisdom, a source of learning. Because it's a very interesting question. Which is more stable? Which is more reliable? Those thoughts in my mind that keep coming up, or this knowing of the breathing? And every time I look, it's like, knowing the breathing is more stable than those thoughts. And at this point, you don't need to really, you might state that conclusion in words, but what you can do, you're looking at which quality wavers more, which is more stable. That's a feeling. You don't have this can be contemplating without words. And you notice, wow, those thoughts, they waver. The breath, when I'm with stays put, the thoughts waver. Right. That's an important realization, because you recognize, it keeps changing, and so maybe I shouldn't trust it so much. That's very big, because You have, what should we say? Most people who get a physics PhD trust their thoughts a lot. And it can take time to undo that. And it's a very important, very helpful and important realization that, thoughts are not a refuge. They can be useful. You can think very skillfully, but even very skillful thoughts are no ultimate refuge. Whereas that quality of knowing looks a lot better. And as one continues to investigate, you can notice, that that quality of knowing, you don't just know the breath, it knows everything else too. And and it was actually, there's a story where, Lumpur Cha, our root teacher, he started out as a study monk. His initial years as a monk were pretty much mostly intellectual study, although he did put a lot of work into learning the monk's discipline. But he became dissatisfied with that because it wasn't putting an end to his suffering. And so he went off he left his studies and went off into the jungle as a what we call a tudong monk, wandering monk. And he heard about this great teacher, Lumpur Mun, who was the founder of the modern Thai forest tradition, almost single-handedly. And so he and several companions made an arduous journey to track down Lumpur Mun, and they arrived. And one of the most significant teachings that Lumpur Cha received during his time with Lumpur Mun, the one he would repeat again and again, was Lumpur Mun said, you learn to distinguish between the mind itself and the moods of the mind. So that quality of knowing and what is known. When this becomes clear, one can make observations such that so for instance, while working with these, we had a circumambulation, late night circumambulation at Amarvati Monastery, and English winter is definitely cold, and I was under the impression that we were supposed to go out and hats were not allowed. So I put my hat away, but I discovered that my assumption was wrong. Everyone else had hats, but I didn't. So, but I'd been practicing with this, and I thought, so I decided to, I had already made the intention to see if I could investigate be able to distinguish between knowing, or between the experience of cold, and the knowing cold. Got out there, and pretty clear. There's the experience of being cold, but knowing cold is not cold. That knowing is not affected by the cold. And so despite being cold, there wasn't the desire to get out of the cold. I was absolutely, totally with the experience of circumambulating the cloister area 3 times. And yeah, it's like I can remember many circumambulations just waiting to get inside where it's warm again. But this time, nope. I mean, there was just, and also, I mean, I got a bit excited. Some joy arose, but then I recognized, hey, wait, knowing joy isn't joy either. This knowing, you know, I mean, the joy is there. Just let it be there, just like the cold. So you have both this joy and this cold, and knowing them both, and it's really clear. Knowing is not joy, it's not cold. You know, and so yeah, I stayed out a few more minutes than everyone else, paid respects at the to the center of the center of the altar that it had made in the cloister, and then went back in. And yeah, it's just like, well, okay, warmer now, but I mean, for that matter, knowing warmth isn't warmth either. So yeah, and just so there it is. I mean, this is as I understand it, this is moving in this direction. It's, you know, this is the path to you know, this is sort of where you go if you want to investigate what the end of suffering, you know, what the end of suffering might be like. Yeah, and there's a lot, and we were getting teachings like this, maybe using slightly different words from Longpo Sumedho once every other week. It was, and Ajahn Amaro much more frequently than that. So it's definitely primed there. So that's just some experiences from that retreat, and how we can hold these things, and how to, where meditation can go. But it's also important to recognize just, being wherever we are in this, you know, with our practice, because I can't do that all the time. No way. You know, those are like the best moments you remember. It most of the time, you know, sometimes it can be pretty frustrating. And another thing that I've reflecting on is our tendency towards idealism, the sense that we know how things should be, and they're not that way, and that's a problem. Again, if you're, with a lot of education, this tendency tends to increase. And there was, I won't name the monk because I'm not absolutely sure who it was, but there was, back when Ajahn Chah, you know, in the late 70s, there was a monk in Thailand, a student of Ajahn Chah, a Westerner, who was having knee trouble. I think much worse than mine. And he opted to have both knees operated on simultaneously, so he could get done quicker. But that put him basically stuck in a hospital bed instead of in a forest. And he was kind of miserable. And so Ajahn Chah went to visit his student in the hospital. And the monk sort of whined to Ajahn Chah, "Ajahn Chah, it shouldn't be like this." If it wasn't, you know, if it shouldn't be like this, it wouldn't be like this, was Ajahn Chah's simultaneously gruff and compassionate reply. And that's I think it's a very helpful perspective. It doesn't, in the Buddhist approach is not about trying to figure out how things should be, but trying to figure out, well, what are the causes? You know, it's very good to first be aware of our feelings about, you know, what things are. If the monk had told Ajahn Chah, you know, "I don't like this," that would have been a much truer statement. Ajahn Chah wouldn't have argued with that, but instead told the monk to investigate, well, what's it like to dislike something? How does that feel? Go in there, be with that. And you can find some empathy for that. It shouldn't be like this does not encourage empathy. You can watch that. It tends to put one in a space of judgment. Another thing another aspect is both, is to look at things in terms of cause and effect. Instead of saying it shouldn't be this way, what are the conditions that brought it to be this way? What happened here? I don't like this. What happened? And that can be skillful, because then you can take the what happened and learn from that in the future. And it can also be very helpful to investigate the forward causes. What is this like? What is this likely to cause? Because, and sometimes it may be necessary to point that out to other people. So instead of telling people it shouldn't be like this, you say, I'm really worried about this because I think it's going to lead to difficult consequences, probably for all of us. Which again is standing on a much firmer foundation of truth than it shouldn't be like this. Which again, who determines who invented what it should be? I mean, our culture comes from a culture which believed in a God which determined how it should and shouldn't be. And so many people no longer believe in that kind of God. But we still keep thinking in some ways that made much more sense in terms of that kind of God, even though we've dropped the belief, perhaps. So again, it's helpful to notice, why do I keep thinking in terms of should and shouldn't? Well, look at the causes of that, really skillful. And then we can perhaps begin to shift this habit, and also when it does shift, recognize how much less suffering there is. So there's, again, you can, because it doesn't take away the pain of life, not at all. In fact, it might even be more painful. Sometimes it shouldn't be like this as a way of distancing ourselves from pain. But instead, if we're empathetic, if we're willing to experience pain, that's more genuine. We can touch our hearts, and we can touch the hearts of others. So again, by now I seem to have plenty of words, but it's time. But the clock says that it's time for questions and answers, and I really appreciate questions. So I will stop here, and how do we do the questions?
Handamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. Thank you, Ajahn. Ajahn Kaccana is with Longpo Sumedho, as he mentioned, for the winter retreat, and you can feel Longpo Sumedho's words and teachings kind of echoing through. It's an honor. So we have a chance for Q&A, like Ajahn Kaccana said, so just raise your hand and we'll run the mic over to you, and if you're on Zoom, you can raise your cartoon hand as well. And I think Miles has someone over there.
I'm going to sit for a bit. Ajahn Kaccana, thank you for that talk. In your opinion, what's the difference between knowing and like metacognitive awareness?
Oh boy, I didn't get my PhD in psychology. So can you in just a few words say what you mean by metacognitive awareness?
All right, so I'll just say from my experience, it's like the thoughts are just happening and I'm just existing in the dome of awareness around them. and it's like I just grab, you grab the thoughts where the momentum is. You kind of just grab and become Alejandro in a way. To me, that's metacognitive awareness. Like thoughts, I'm just existing in this dome of awareness of observing the thoughts.
I mean, it sounds, I can't give you a definitive answer. It sounds similar, where you're, again, the Buddha's teachings are about cause and effect. And so one of the ways that if you're wondering about a given state of meditation, you look for sort of, in a way, what is the next step that this can condition in the path towards the end of suffering? And if it moves towards that next step, it's probably right on, even if it doesn't quite fit. And so where you go from that knowing, a skillful direction to go is in terms of, we experience that knowing all the time. Sometimes sometimes we're much more conscious of it than others. But if you can really learn to trust that and let go of other things, so that trusting and awareness leads to a quality of dispassion towards other things, and a skillful dispassion. So you're just less bothered by things. So if practicing metacognitive awareness like that does that for you, I would suggest that that's probably the right track. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ajahn. I hope I can word this question clearly. It is kind of on psychology, but I'm curious what the balance is between having that awareness mind and really being in touch with our experience. So being in contact with it, like the felt sense of it, because what does it really mean to investigate? Is that being in contact with it, like seeing the texture and the sensations that are associated with what's happening, and how to strike that balance? Because it seems like, from where I stand at least, having too much of a connection with the awareness mind can be really dissociative and just create a distance from our experience. But then also we don't want to get hooked on our sensations too.
Good question. And just noticing that is very helpful. And this is just my own experience. I can remember times when I have deliberately, and I would now say mistakenly, tried to dissociate from experience in some way or another, thinking that would be, dispassion or awareness. But when I was out there experiencing the cold, I was totally aware of that cold. I mean, it was not, when other times circumambulating, I'd be trying to dissociate from the cold. I'd be distracting my mind because I didn't like it. But it's like, I can be cold. And I was actually deliberately trying to feel every bit of what it felt like to be cold. I was way more there. And yet that knowing was really strong. So I would suggest that, you can find the knowing that you're looking for is not dissociative at all. It allows you to feel everything in great detail, but at the same time, you have it. You know it in a way. You know something else. It's not like you don't believe, oh, this is definitely me. No, this is an experience. Okay?
Maybe we could get a Zoom question. Joseph, we might hold on and let others who speak less speak today. Kira.
I was wondering, with respect to distractions, if you have any recommendations for working with especially vivid distractions. So sometimes external sensations I find easier to work with, the cold or discomfort or something, but I'll sometimes find that my mind has left the cushion and it brought me into a movie of a memory or something. And I find it harder to work with that because observing that, there's a little bit less to be mindful of. It's like I can get further caught up in the distraction. It's hard to know how much to observe it, try to engage with it, or return to breath or whatever I'm being mindful of. Thank you.
Yeah, again, good question. This is mindfulness of breathing is recommended specifically to alleviate discursive thought. A lot of it is, I would say, it is easier to be with the cold than to be with distracting thoughts. And I still have not found a truly excellent solution here. That's one of the reasons why, it takes a whole winter retreat to calm the mind down enough to be able to see these things, or at least in my case. But so much of the time there, if one finds the distractions, what you want to do is go back to that experience of well-being in the body, because there, that's a more can, if that can become a more appealing place than the distractions, they'll sort of fade on their own. But just trying to start out by being awareness, sort of, aware of the distractions in a way that is not, knowing awareness of distractions is not distracted. Starting there is can be challenging.
May I add something, Ajahn?
Yes.
Additionally, Kira, I think just piggybacking on what Ajahn Kaccana said about tapping into the bodily energy, like that deeper substrate of experience, if you, I think, want help making that more compelling, if you have cultivated that bodily awareness, just taking to heart that pillar analogy, and if there's a lot of swirling kind of surface thoughts, then sending your awareness down into the earth, imagining roots going down, and breathe into the earth, and you might really find that there's this settling, grounding quality, like a lightning rod, and a lot of the sort of static energy that's leading to those proliferative surface thoughts just bleeds out and grounds, and then you can kind of return to the center, and they'll still maybe be swirling there, like Ajahn Amaro talks about a retreat where he went through the whole soundtrack of the musical Oklahoma. But it might be very light and kind of become less and less compelling, and it's okay to kind of let it swirl in the background in that case. Or you can put awareness up into the top, sort of above the head in this sort of bright space, and sometimes that will let the energy sort of vibrate out on that higher frequency and get out and then kind of settle back to the center. And the final thing is just to notice if there's any tension points that arise with the thinking patterns. And often you'll notice there will be, say, tension in the brow or the jaw or the eyes. And if you relax that, then the whole thinking pattern can fall apart as well. Okay, more questions? Steve?
Thank you. I feel like everyone's asking different facets of the same question, which is very cool. In your leading into the meditation, you defined concentration, I think, as stability of mind, but could you reiterate what that was and expand that a little bit versus, an object of concentration?
Sure. Yeah, this is, Ajahn Pasano has a lot to say there. It's really, so in Thai, samadhi gets translated as the firm establishment of the mind. And so the concentration is maybe the best single English word for it, maybe. But concentration, for us Westerners, it's Rodin's The Thinker, like this. That's concentration. And that's not samadhi. So the object of samadhi can be broad. It can be either narrow or broad. But what is essential is that quality of the firmness. But it's a relaxed form of firmness. It's not relaxed precise attention is a trio of adjective or trio of words that I've worked with. And again, our society, we don't tend to cultivate that very much. When we relax, we space out. When we pay attention, we tense up. And thus are our habits.
The way I've been working with those thoughts of I know how things should be and they shouldn't be the way they are is to recognize the conceit in that and how ridiculous it is. Does that seem skillful?
Yes, it seems very skillful. Conceit is a massive source of suffering.
Thank you so much for the talk, Ajahn. So when you talk about knowing and known, the knowing of the known, I think that's great, and especially the knowing is stable and the known can change. But I wonder, every time we talk about knowing and known, I think of a knower. And then I think, okay, Buddhism doesn't believe in the self, so maybe there is no knower, there's just knowing and known. But I just have to ask, is there a knower? So, one of the rather interesting qualities of that knowing is that you can try to doubt it or turn it into something. But as soon as you start try to doubt that knowing or figure out what it is, doubting the knowing, if you're really paying attention, quickly changes into knowing doubt, and you're right back where you started. And so Lumpur Sumedho uses the metaphor that you can't see your own eyes. And in a way, my own sense is that we look for, when we say knowing, and that's a sort of a verb/noun, and we look at, and when we see one of those, we look for a knower. But that's simply, in my mind, I understand it as being conditioned by our language. And so in a way we're asking a question which doesn't, it may have no answer, but what shall we say? Yeah, it's our language is inadequate to describe the world, and it seems certainly inadequate to bring about the cessation of suffering. And so the Buddha was, adamant. I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering. And throughout the entire 2,500 years of Buddhist history, human beings have very understandably been trying to turn that into a worldview. And
as I understand it, the Buddha was not teaching a worldview. There is, in a way, you could say, there is no, as soon as there's a view of a world, there's suffering. And so he said, I teach the cessation of suffering. And when you experience that for yourself, you'll know it, but you won't be able to say anything more about it than I can.
Can I just add a little bit?
Please.
This is a great answer, Ajahn. Thank you. It is tempting to ask when we talk about the knowing, say, who is the knowing? But something that I find very interesting is to ask, where is the knowing? Where is the knowing? And it really does tap into a lot of the other questions, like metacognition in English is not very well defined, but it does suggest a higher order of thinking, almost like, out-of-body experience, kind of looking down. And the interesting thing about the mind is you can't really place. It isn't. You can think of it as a centerless center, or where is the mind is a much more interesting question. It touches on this aspect of dissociation, is that there is a way to just, really stay with that out-of-bodiness as an escape route, and that's not what Buddhism is advocating. So much of Thai language, like this word, this strong establishment of mind, the word mind there is actually heart, jai. And you can know from the heart, and that's actually a very different place to know from. So where are you knowing? You can know from behind the eyeballs, and that's, unfortunately, I feel like that's what causes a lot of our face wrinkles and the, constant kind of just contraction of our brow. But you can know from the heart, you can know from a full embodied experience, you can know from internal and external. So where is the knowing is also a really fascinating question. And a really cool thing about Buddhism is that there's not one right answer. It's about what is most useful, and experimenting, like when might it be most useful to come from the heart, to know from the heart? When might it be most useful to know from a fully, very embodied, knowing from the top of the head down to the soles of the feet? Or like Ajahn Nisabo suggests, even rooting further down than that. So, having a flexibility of heart there. I think we might have time for one more question.
Hey, Ajahn. Thanks so much for the fascinating Q&A and talk. Just one question about the meditation instructions you gave. We started with the kind of knowing of the breath, right? And then it went more towards the end, you said something about kind of broadening more toward knowing the entire body. Just, I'm wondering if you can say more like when to use which, or what a skillful way to know is, like when to be more like focused on the one thing, and then when to be more focused on or let it be the more broad awareness of the body.
Yes. My sense here is that that's a question for investigation. If I told you I could tell you what works for me, but there's no reason why that should also be the right answer for you. What you're looking for is just what tends to work, what's effective, and you can list the advantages and disadvantages of each, because the advantage of staying with a relatively narrow focus of awareness is that it can be easier to stabilize that, which is why I suggest starting there in the beginning. But then that the disadvantage is that it can get tight, and also my own sense is that with a broad awareness, one's more likely to detect what you're deluded by. If you stay focused at one point, you can be totally deluded by something somewhere else, and you're not seeing it. Okay.
Can we get 3 sadhus for Ajahn Kaccana? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And 3 for Jean and Carl for giving birth to Ajahn Kaccana.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.